Rome does not announce the night tonight, it exhales it slowly, as if even darkness deserves careful handling, as if the city has learned that volume attracts attention, and attention costs energy. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. After dark in the year 410, Rome feels less like a capital and more like a collection of rooms that have agreed to cooperate. The great spaces withdraw first, forums empty without ceremony, streets dim without regret. What remains active is not what was designed to be impressive, but what happens to be enclosed, predictable, and warm. A small stone courtyard at the center of an ordinary house becomes the city in miniature, not by ambition, but by default. The stones underfoot still hold the heat of the afternoon, released slowly and without drama. No one planned this as a thermal strategy. It simply works because it always has. Stone remembers the day longer than people do, and tonight that memory is enough to soften the air. The walls lean inward just slightly, not to trap anyone, but to keep the world scaled to something manageable. Rome, once famous for expanding outward, now survives by folding in. An oil lamp rests low to the ground, placed where it illuminates what matters and ignores what does not. It lights the threshold, the edge of a basin, the familiar shapes that do not need explanation. The flame is steady, unimpressed by history, and efficient to the point of quiet smugness. It burns without wasting attention, which may be the most Roman thing left in the city at this hour. The household is asleep, not ceremonially, not romantically, simply asleep. Bodies arranged where space allows, trusting routine more than comfort. Sleep here is not an escape, but a maintenance task, something done because tomorrow will arrive regardless. In a city that no longer promises certainty, rest becomes a form of cooperation with reality rather than resistance to it. Water drips somewhere nearby. Not enough to alarm anyone, not enough to stop. Just enough to remind the courtyard that systems continue even when minds disengage. The sound marks time better than any clock, slow and indifferent. A rhythm that does not rush toward meaning. Rome has many opinions about time during the day. At night, it lets water decide. Outside the walls, the city grows smaller by agreement rather than force. Fewer footsteps, fewer voices, less incentive to notice one another. This is not fear, it is efficiency. A city with less to prove discovers that silence is cheaper than vigilance. The courtyard becomes a boundary not of defense, but of focus. Everything necessary fits inside it. Everything unnecessary can wait. There is a gentle irony here, one the city would appreciate if it were awake enough to care. Rome, trained for centuries to perform authority through scale and spectacle, functions best tonight by refusing to perform at all. It does not persuade the night. It adapts to it. The empire once extended power through roads and movement. Now survival extends through stillness and repetition. No one in this courtyard is thinking about decline. That requires distance and daylight. Night thinking is narrower and more useful. Is the door closed? Is the lamp trimmed? Is the water contained? These questions do not produce speeches, but they keep people intact. History rarely pauses to notice how much effort goes into not collapsing. Above the open center of the courtyard, the sky offers no commentary. Stars appear when they choose. Clouds interrupt without apology. The heavens do not explain Rome to itself. They simply exist, which is apparently enough. The walls accept this arrangement, blocking wind, softening sound, allowing the household to forget the rest of the city without denying that it exists. This is how Rome continues in 410, not as an idea, not as a warning, but as an arrangement that still works when scaled correctly. The courtyard does not commemorate anything. It does not record names or victories. By morning, nothing here will be worth reporting. And that is precisely why it succeeds. While grand narratives sleep uneasily elsewhere, this small, warm, unimpressive space performs the quiet work of continuity. It keeps people alive without insisting that they notice. It lowers the city's voice until survival no longer sounds like an announcement. And in that restraint, Rome remains exactly alive enough to last another night. Rome has already made its decision for the night, and it is not to observe, not to patrol, not to project confidence outward, but to listen inward, because listening costs less than watching and requires fewer promises. At some point after darkness settles fully in 410, the walls of the city stop pretending they are instruments of control and return to what they have always done best, which is to separate one manageable space from another. These walls no longer define ambition. They define boundaries small enough for people to feel where they end. A wall that listens does not need to be tall or threatening. It only needs to be consistent. Stone does not react. It absorbs. Inside the house, the courtyard walls hold sound the way they hold warmth. Voices from outside arrive softened, blurred, sometimes unrecognizable. This is not an accident. It is the quiet advantage of enclosure. When sound loses its sharp edges, it also loses urgency. A distant step becomes irrelevant. A passing voice becomes texture rather than information. The city stops demanding interpretation and allows the household to rest. These walls were never meant to be heroic. They were built for shade, for privacy, for the simple human need not to be perceived at all times. In a Rome that once equated visibility with power, this turns out to be an unexpectedly useful philosophy. At night, the safest thing a wall can do is reduce clarity. What cannot be clearly seen does not require an immediate response. Listening walls are not passive. They are selective. They filter. They allow certain sounds through because they do not matter. Water, wind, the distant cough of someone who will also survive the night. They block sounds that would force action. The sudden shout, the clatter that demands explanation. The city's nocturnal intelligence shifts from reaction to avoidance, and the walls quietly enforce this policy without debate. The people sleeping inside do not think about walls as systems. They think of them as givens. You lean against them, you trust them to be where they were yesterday. This trust is not sentimental, it is practical. A wall that does not move allows the mind to stop scanning for threats. Rome, once obsessed with expansion, now benefits from predictability more than reach. Outside streets narrow into irrelevance. The wide ceremonial avenues belong to daylight and memory. At night, movement prefers routes that bend, that disappear, that do not offer long lines of sight. Walls assist by interrupting vision. Corners become allies. Straight lines become liabilities. The city quietly reorganizes itself into fragments that are easier to protect by ignoring. There is a mild, almost polite irony in how this works. The walls that once declared permanence now specialize in privacy. They do not announce strength. They provide insulation. They do not intimidate the night. They cooperate with it. Rome discovers that endurance does not require dominance, only the refusal to escalate. Inside the courtyard, the walls collect stories they will never repeat, footsteps that passed, voices that softened, nights that ended without incident. Walls are excellent historians because they never publish. They remember without interpretation. They hold marks of repair, of reuse, of small adjustments made by people who did not expect applause for keeping things intact. Listening also changes time. When watching, time stretches, waiting for something to happen. When listening, time settles. Sounds arrive on their own schedule. You do not chase them. The night becomes less about anticipation and more about acceptance. Rome, long trained to anticipate threats and opportunities, relaxes into a slower rhythm that feels suspiciously like relief. The city beyond the walls still exists, of course, but it exists as background rather than obligation. Fires burn lower, conversations shorten, activity contracts to what is essential. Walls make this contraction possible by making it unremarkable. Nothing dramatic signals the change. It simply happens the way habits always do. There is no command issued for this behavior. No official decree instructs walls to listen instead of watch. This is not policy. It is adaptation. When systems grow too large to manage loudly, they survive by becoming quieter. Rome learns this lesson not in council chambers but in courtyards. Even the city's older defenses participate in this shift. Gates that once regulated traffic now rest. Towers that once scanned horizons become silhouettes against the sky. They still stand, but they no longer strain to interpret every movement. A watched city is tense. A listening city is selective. Selectivity conserves energy. For those inside, this has an unexpected emotional effect. Safety no longer feels performative. It feels ambient. You do not see it working, which means you are free to stop thinking about it. The walls do their work invisibly, which is the highest compliment a structure can receive. Night deepens. Sounds thin. The courtyard grows smaller, not in size, but in importance. It becomes the center, not because it demands attention, but because everything else has learned to step back. The walls accept this without protest. They have always known that their job was not to dominate space, but to make inhabiting it possible. In this Rome, walls are no longer symbols. They are collaborators. They allow people to sleep without asking them to believe in anything larger than the room they occupy. They reduce the city to a scale that fits the human nervous system, which may be the most generous form of architecture ever attempted. And so the night continues, held gently in place by stone that listens more than it looks, by boundaries that understand that survival is not about seeing everything, but about not needing to. Light in Rome after dark no longer arrives with ambition. It arrives with restraint, experience, and a clear understanding that the night does not reward those who try to dominate it. By the year 410, illumination has been demoted from symbol to tool, and strangely enough, the city functions better because of it. The oil lamp has learned its position in the household hierarchy, and that position is neither central nor decorative. It sits low, close to the floor, where it can perform its duties without attracting unnecessary attention. This placement is not accidental, and it is certainly not aesthetic. Light that rises too high leaks outward, and what leaks outward must eventually be explained. Rome at this hour has no interest in explanations. The flame itself behaves like something that understands scarcity. It burns steadily, without flourish, without dramatic movement. It does not flicker unless disturbed, and even then it settles quickly, as if embarrassed by the display. This is light that knows its fuel is finite and intends to make it through the night without becoming a problem. There is no romance in this discipline, but there is comfort. Inside the house, illumination is selective to the point of being almost judgmental. Some spaces earn light because they are necessary. Doorways, thresholds, the narrow paths people walk when half awake and uninterested in collision. Other spaces are ignored entirely, left to memory and habit. Darkness is not treated as a failure here. It is treated as an acceptable condition for rooms that have nothing urgent to offer. This selectivity changes behavior. Movement becomes slower, more deliberate. People do not wander, they go where they already know they need to be. Light teaches the body efficiency without instruction. In a city that once thrived on excess visibility, this quiet discipline feels almost radical. There was a time when Rome extended light as a form of authority. Streets were illuminated to assert control. Public spaces were kept visible to reinforce order. But by 410, light has learned that extending itself creates obligations. If you illuminate something, you invite interaction. Interaction leads to unpredictability. Unpredictability costs energy. The lamp inside the house solves this problem by refusing to extend beyond its assignment. The result is a city that contracts at night not out of fear, but out of preference. The illuminated world becomes smaller, more manageable, more honest. People are not overwhelmed by choices because many options are simply not visible. This is not deprivation. It is relief disguised as simplicity. The lamp illuminates continuity rather than novelty. It lights the same surfaces it lit yesterday, the same table edge, the same basin, the same familiar imperfections in stone and wood. Nothing new demands attention. Nothing needs interpretation. In this repetition, the household finds reassurance. Familiarity becomes a form of safety, more reliable than any patrol. Outside the house, street lighting is sparse and unapologetic. Darkness is allowed to remain darkness. The city no longer tries to correct the night by turning it into a poor imitation of day. This decision reduces strain. A city that accepts darkness does not have to manage everything it conceals. Rome learns quietly that not seeing is sometimes the most economical form of control. With fewer illuminated spaces, social expectations shrink as well. There are fewer places to gather, fewer reasons to linger, fewer chances for misunderstanding to become obligation. Darkness lowers the temperature of interaction. The lamp inside the house supports this by keeping attention exactly where it belongs and nowhere else. Maintaining the lamp is itself a nightly ritual, one that reveals how deeply this restraint has been internalized. The wick is trimmed carefully, not for beauty but for endurance. Too long and the flame wastes oil. Too short and it risks extinguishing itself. The correct balance is learned through repetition rather than instruction. This is knowledge that does not need to be written down because it lives in the hands. Oil is measured, not ceremonially, not anxiously, but attentively. There is no panic about running out, only an understanding that excess today reduces comfort tomorrow. This is a city that has stopped mistaking abundance for security. The lamp teaches this lesson nightly without speaking. There is a subtle irony here. Rome, once famous for lighting itself as proof of power, now thrives by dimming itself into sustainability. Illumination no longer signals control, it signals rest. It tells the household that enough has been done for today. The lamp becomes less a beacon and more a boundary. As the night deepens, lamps across the city grow fewer and lower. Some are extinguished deliberately once their task is complete. Others are allowed to burn down naturally, surrendering to exhaustion rather than being forcibly ended. This is not negligence. It is trust in routine. Morning will arrive regardless of how much light remains at midnight. Darkness fills the gaps without hostility. It is not treated as an enemy, only as an environment that does not require constant correction. Rome adapts to it rather than resisting it, and this adaptation allows the city to rest without pretending to be vigilant. The psychological effect of this restrained lighting is profound, even if unacknowledged. With fewer visual stimuli, the mind slows. Thoughts become narrower, less ambitious. The future feels less demanding when it cannot be fully seen. The night stops being something to endure and becomes something to pass through gently. The lamp does not chase meaning. It does not try to illuminate history, destiny, or decline. It keeps people from stumbling. It protects edges. It marks just enough space to remain human without becoming alert. This modest goal turns out to be sufficient. Even silence behaves differently under such lighting. Sounds feel closer, more contained. The drip of water, the shift of a body, the quiet settling of wood as temperatures change. None of these sounds demand action. They simply confirm continuity. The lamp's presence makes them intelligible without making them urgent. Rome's houses become islands of manageable awareness in a city that has learned to stop surveilling itself. Light supports this transformation by refusing to extend further than necessary. It creates small zones of certainty rather than large zones of responsibility. In this way, the oil lamp becomes one of the city's most effective survival tools, not because it reveals danger, but because it reduces the number of things that can become dangerous. It simplifies the night by narrowing perception, and in doing so, it preserves energy that would otherwise be spent on worry. There is no celebration when the flame finally dims, no sense of loss. The darkness that replaces it feels earned, almost deserved. The lamp has completed its task. It has wasted nothing. Oil, attention, effort, expectation, all conserved. The city sleeps better because of this restraint, not because it is safer, but because it demands less of itself. Rome no longer insists on seeing everything. It has learned to trust the dark where it can, and to light only what must be held steady until morning. In 410, this is what illumination has become. Not a declaration of order, but a quiet agreement with limits. The lamp accepts its role. The night accepts the lamp. And between them, the city remains intact. Not loudly, not proudly, but effectively. Water does not wait for permission in Rome at night. It speaks anyway, quietly, steadily, without caring whether anyone is listening closely enough to understand what it is saying. By the time darkness settles fully over the city in 410, water has already assumed its role as the most reliable presence still awake. People withdraw. Lamps lower themselves into modest usefulness. Walls listen instead of watch. And water continues, not louder, not faster, simply uninterrupted. In a city learning how to survive by reducing effort, water becomes the only thing that does not need to adjust its behavior to remain essential. Inside the courtyard, the sound is small and precise. A drip from a jar imperfectly sealed. A thin trickle slipping along stone toward a basin that has been filled and emptied so many times it no longer pretends to be surprised. This is not the dramatic water of fountains or aqueduct arches, not water meant to impress or reassure. This is domestic water, the kind that measures time more effectively than any clock because it refuses to hurry. The night does not demand conversation, but it does allow one, and water fills that role without overstepping. It does not ask questions. It does not offer explanations. It simply confirms that systems still function. In a city where so many assurances have grown unreliable, this confirmation matters more than anyone would openly admit. People sleeping nearby do not wake to analyze the sound. Their bodies recognize it without thought. Water moving means containment still works. It means yesterday's storage did not fail. It means tomorrow's routines remain possible. These are not comforting ideas in a poetic sense. They are comforting because they remove the need to imagine alternatives. Water at night in Rome is never ambitious. It does not travel far. It stays within known paths. Pipes hum softly behind walls. Channels guide runoff with no interest in spectacle. Even leaks behave politely, announcing themselves slowly rather than catastrophically. The city, once engineered to move water at an imperial scale, now appreciates its smaller, more manageable expressions. There was a time when water in Rome performed authority. Aqueducts marched across landscapes. Baths proclaimed abundance. Fountains asserted control over nature and comfort over scarcity. But by 410, water has been reassigned. It no longer needs to prove anything. It needs only to arrive where expected and remain there long enough to be trusted. The courtyard becomes an acoustic chamber for this trust. Stone amplifies the drip just enough to make it noticeable, but never intrusive. The sound does not dominate the night. It blends with breathing, with the subtle shifts of sleep, with the faint movement of air cooling against walls. Water does not interrupt rest. It accompanies it. This companionship is important. Silence alone can feel unstable. Total quiet invites attention. It encourages listening too hard, imagining too much. Water prevents this by filling the space between thoughts with something real and unthreatening. It gives the mind permission to stop scanning. Outside the house, the city's larger water systems continue their slow work. Drains carry away what cannot remain. Cisterns hold what will be needed. Wells wait patiently, unbothered by the hour. None of this requires supervision. Water does not benefit from being watched. It benefits from being allowed to follow gravity. Rome learns something here, though it never articulates it. Systems that require constant attention are fragile. Systems that function unattended are durable. Water teaches this lesson nightly, drip by drip, without demanding that anyone take notes. Even the sound of water reflects the city's new relationship with scale. It is not the roar of abundance or the silence of failure. It is moderation made audible. Enough movement to reassure, not enough to alarm. This balance mirrors the city itself, which now survives not by expansion or conquest, but by staying within limits it can actually manage. There is a quiet humor in how seriously water takes its role. It never rests, it never celebrates, it never pauses for reflection. While people sleep and lights dim, water continues its work without acknowledging the night at all. In doing so, it becomes the most dependable inhabitant of the city. Those who wake briefly during the night do not look for signs of power or order. They listen. The presence of water is enough to tell them that nothing has gone wrong that cannot wait until morning. This is a low standard of reassurance, but it is perfectly suited to a city that has learned to lower its expectations in order to keep them realistic. Water also erases the boundary between day and night more gently than any other element. During the day, it is managed, directed, used. At night, it simply exists. The same channels, the same basins, the same containers continue without needing new instructions. Continuity becomes visible not through activity, but through persistence. In this Rome, water does not symbolize purity or renewal. It symbolizes maintenance. It is the substance that keeps routines possible without inspiring anyone to overreach. This modest symbolism suits the hour. Night is not when cities reinvent themselves. It is when they prove they do not need to. The city's relationship with water also reveals how much trust has replaced command. There are fewer guards overseeing flows, fewer interventions, less anxiety about controlling every outcome. Water is allowed to behave as water, and the city benefits from this restraint. As the hours deepen, the sound remains unchanged. No crescendo, no warning, just repetition. This repetition does not dull the senses. It steadies them. It reminds the body that the world has not shifted beneath it while it rested. Eventually, the drip blends so thoroughly into the background that it disappears from conscious thought altogether. This is its greatest success. When water becomes unnoticed, it means it has fulfilled its purpose. It has become reliable enough to be ignored. Morning will come, and with it louder conversations, voices, footsteps, demands. Water will then return to being something people use rather than hear. But for now, in the long middle of the night, it holds the city together with sound too small to argue with. In 410, Rome survives not by shouting its presence into the dark, but by letting water speak on its behalf. The message is simple, unambitious, and entirely sufficient. Things are still moving, containers still hold, paths still guide. Sleep can continue. Water finishes the night without applause, without witnesses, and without waste. And when the city wakes, it will not thank it, because the best systems are the ones no one remembers to praise. Sleep in Rome no longer performs for anyone. It simply happens, quietly, privately, and without the expectation of being remembered in the morning. By the middle of the night in 410, sleep has shed its earlier associations with ritual, status, or display, and returned to something far more practical. It is no longer a moment framed by ceremony or guarded by servants waiting nearby. It is an ordinary condition entered because the body insists on it and because nothing is gained by resisting. Rome, once obsessed with being seen even at rest, now discovers the efficiency of sleeping without witnesses. In the houses clustered behind walls that listen more than they watch, sleep arrives unevenly. Some fall into it quickly, exhausted by work that does not care about politics. Others drift more slowly, carried by familiar sounds and predictable darkness. There is no unified rhythm, and no one tries to impose one. Sleep here is personal rather than coordinated, which turns out to be far easier to maintain. Beds are modest, sometimes barely deserving the name. Mats, low frames, layered fabrics that have learned the shape of the bodies that use them. Comfort is achieved not through luxury, but through familiarity. The body knows where it fits. It knows how to arrange itself without instruction. This knowledge matters more than softness. No one sleeps to be admired. There are no spectators, no attendants hovering to ensure that rest looks appropriate. The absence of an audience allows sleep to become inefficient in a useful way. People sprawl, positions change, breath deepens without concern for decorum. Rome rests more honestly when it stops monitoring itself. There is a subtle freedom in this invisibility. When sleep is not observed, it no longer needs to signal virtue or discipline. It does not have to look orderly. It only has to work. This shift removes a layer of pressure that the city did not realize it was carrying. Rest improves when it is no longer a performance. The night supports this by remaining uninterested. Darkness does not comment. It does not reward elegance or punish awkwardness. It simply provides cover. In a city accustomed to scrutiny, this indifference feels almost generous. Children sleep wherever they are placed, and sometimes where they are not. Adults adjust around them without complaint. Space is negotiated quietly. These negotiations do not require words because they repeat nightly. Bodies learn each other's boundaries through habit rather than discussion. Sleep becomes a shared routine without becoming a shared event. Outside, the streets do not demand awareness. There are no crowds to impress, no processions to overhear. The city offers nothing that would justify staying awake longer than necessary. This absence of stimulation is not accidental. Rome has learned that nights filled with activity are expensive, and expense no longer brings the returns it once did. Sleep also changes when fear is no longer theatrical. There are concerns, of course. Doors are closed. Lamps are lowered. But anxiety does not announce itself loudly. It settles into the background, manageable because it is not constantly provoked. When sleep is private, fear does not need to be displayed either. There is a quiet irony in how unremarkable this is. History tends to dramatize the inability to sleep as a sign of crisis. Yet here, in a city often described as unstable, people sleep. Not perfectly, not deeply every night, but well enough. This adequacy is its own form of resilience. Dreams, if they come, are unrecorded and unimportant. No one wakes to interpret them. They do not shape policy or inspire action. They pass through the night like weather, experienced and then forgotten. Rome does not require meaning from its sleep. It only requires recovery. The architecture supports this modest expectation. Rooms are small enough to feel contained. Ceilings are low enough to hold warmth. Openings are limited. The physical environment does not invite the imagination to wander too far. This containment helps the mind follow the body into rest. Noise behaves differently when sleep is unobserved. Small sounds are tolerated, a shift, a cough, a distant footstep that does not approach further. None of these trigger alarms. The sleeping city has learned which sounds matter and which do not. Most do not. There is no official hour for sleep, to begin or end. People follow their own thresholds. This lack of synchronization might seem chaotic, but it reduces friction. When rest is not enforced, it adapts naturally to individual limits. The city becomes quieter, not because everyone sleeps at once, but because enough people choose to. This choice is important. Sleep that is chosen feels safer than sleep that is required. Rome, having experienced too many requirements, appreciates this distinction. The night allows permission rather than command. As the hours pass, the city holds itself together through the cumulative effect of many private rests. There is no grand silence, only the sum of small, quiet decisions. Each household contributes by withdrawing attention from the outside world. The city survives not by coordination, but by coincidence. There is also relief in knowing that sleep will not be evaluated. No one will ask how well it was done. No one will measure its quality. Morning will arrive, and work will resume, based on what the body can offer, not on how graceful the night appeared. In this Rome, rest is no longer a symbol of privilege. It is a shared necessity managed without commentary. This equalizing effect goes unnoticed, which is perhaps its greatest success. The night deepens and the city recedes further into itself. Houses become islands of breathing bodies, unconnected except by shared darkness. This fragmentation does not weaken Rome, it stabilizes it. Smaller worlds are easier to maintain. When dawn eventually approaches, it does not interrupt a spectacle. It simply finds people where they are, rested enough or not, ready to continue. Sleep does not promise renewal. It promises continuity. And in 410, that promise is sufficient. Rome does not need its sleep to be seen, praised, or remembered. It only needs it to happen again tomorrow night. And so it does, quietly, without witnesses, without applause, and without regret. The streets of Rome do not collapse at night. They simply stop remembering what they were once meant to do. By 410, after darkness settles and households retreat into their smaller, warmer worlds, the streets are left without instructions. During the day, they still pretend to know their purpose. They guide carts, channel feet, connect places that insist on being connected. At night, that insistence fades. Without crowds, without spectacle, without urgency, the streets lose their lines, not physically, but conceptually. They no longer point anywhere important. This forgetting is not sudden. It has been rehearsed over many nights. With each passing year, fewer reasons remain to keep streets legible after dark. There are no parades to prepare for, no official routes that must remain clear, no audiences to shepherd from one display of order to another. The streets discover that when no one is watching, they can relax. Straight roads feel unnecessary at night. Long sight lines offer little advantage. Curves and bends become preferable because they shorten what can be seen and therefore what must be processed. Rome's older streets, already shaped by centuries of compromise, quietly reclaim this advantage. They become spaces you move through by memory rather than by direction. Movement changes accordingly. People who do step outside at night do not travel far. They do not move with confidence or hesitation. They move with familiarity. They know how many steps it takes to reach the next corner. They know which walls catch the wind, which stones are uneven. The street is no longer a public statement. It is a personal path. Lighting reinforces this shift. With lamps low and sparse, the streets are not fully revealed. They appear in fragments. A doorway here, a patch of stone there. Darkness fills the rest without apology. The city does not attempt to outline itself anymore. It allows large portions of its layout to remain implied rather than visible. This partial visibility has consequences. When you cannot see far, you do not plan far. Routes shorten, destinations shrink. People stop crossing the city for reasons that can wait until morning. The streets become corridors of necessity rather than ambition. Rome benefits from this reduction in scale more than it benefits from any form of nighttime control. There is also less need to defend what cannot be clearly located. When streets lose their lines, they lose their strategic value. They are no longer obvious stages for confrontation or display. They are simply spaces between closed doors. This ambiguity protects them. What is not clearly defined is harder to claim. The city once invested enormous effort into making its streets readable. Names, monuments, alignments, all designed to orient the citizen within a larger system. At night, in 410, orientation becomes local. You know where you are because you know your own block. Anything beyond that does not matter until daylight returns. This localization of awareness reduces tension. A person moving through a small, familiar stretch of street does not carry the same alertness as someone navigating a grand avenue. There is less to monitor, less to interpret, less that could suddenly require response. The street becomes an extension of the household rather than a threshold into uncertainty. Sound behaves differently as well. In the absence of traffic and crowds, footsteps are audible but not alarming. They echo briefly and then disappear. Because streets no longer channel large flows of people, a single sound does not signal momentum. It signals only itself. This distinction matters. A lone sound can be ignored. A moving mass cannot. The city's infrastructure adapts to this quieter role without ceremony. Repairs are fewer. Surfaces wear unevenly. No one rushes to correct imperfections that do not interfere with daytime use. At night, these irregularities actually help. They slow movement. They discourage speed. They remind anyone passing through that this space is not optimized for haste. Rome's streets also lose their social function after dark. They are no longer places to linger, to converse, to observe. Interaction retreats indoors. This is not enforced, it is chosen. The streets offer nothing that justifies exposure. In return, they are spared the burden of hosting activity they can no longer support. There is mild irony in this transformation. Streets that once symbolized connection now succeed by enabling disconnection. By allowing households to remain isolated, they reduce the spread of trouble. The city fragments into manageable units, each one less dependent on the others to remain stable through the night. This fragmentation does not feel like loss to those living it. It feels like simplification. When the world shrinks, it becomes easier to hold in mind. Rome, long overextended in both geography and expectation, finds relief in streets that stop demanding coherence. Even authority adjusts to this reality. There are fewer patrols, fewer attempts to impose order where order no longer pays for itself. Presence becomes selective. Oversight retreats to areas where it still matters. The rest of the city is allowed to exist in a state of benign neglect, which turns out to be surprisingly effective. At night, the streets accept shadows without resistance. Doorways recede, walls blend together, boundaries soften. This visual ambiguity mirrors the city's political and social ambiguity, but without the anxiety usually associated with it. When nothing is clearly defined, nothing needs immediate defense. Those who remember older Rome's might find this disorienting. A city that once prided itself on clarity now tolerates vagueness. But this tolerance is precisely what keeps it functioning. Precision requires maintenance. Ambiguity maintains itself. As the hours pass, the streets continue to forget. They forget crowds, they forget processions, they forget the weight of history moving across them. They remember only what is necessary: stone, space, the occasional footstep that passes without incident. When dawn approaches, the streets will begin to remember again. Lines will reassert themselves. Paths will regain meaning. Movement will resume its patterns. But the night will leave no trace of its amnesia. Nothing will mark the hours when the city functioned without direction. In 410, this nightly forgetting is not a failure. It is an adaptation. Streets that do not insist on relevance are easier to maintain. They survive by becoming background rather than foreground. Rome continues because its streets no longer demand to be understood after dark. They accept being passed through without being interpreted. They hold space without asking for purpose. And in that quiet absence of lines, the city rests, intact, unremarkable, and ready to forget again tomorrow night. Rome does not miss its monuments at night because monuments require attention. And attention is precisely what the city is no longer willing to spend after dark. By 410, the work of endurance has quietly shifted away from marble statements and into domestic spaces that were never meant to carry symbolic weight. During the day, ruins still stand where they always have. Arches still cast their familiar shadows, and columns continue to suggest permanence, whether anyone believes in it or not. At night, however, these structures fall silent in a different way. They do not fail, they simply become irrelevant. What keeps the city intact until morning is not scale, but shelter. Homes take on a new responsibility without being asked. They become the places where continuity actually happens, not because they are grand or well-designed, but because they are inhabited. A home is valuable at night not for what it represents, but for what it absorbs. Heat, sound, bodies, fatigue, uncertainty. These things collect quietly inside walls that were built for use rather than admiration. The shift is subtle enough that no one announces it. There is no moment when Rome officially decides that houses matter more than monuments. It simply becomes obvious through repetition. When people retreat from the night, they do not retreat toward civic ideals. They retreat toward rooms they recognize. The city survives by following them inward. Inside these homes, architecture is modest and forgiving. Spaces are small enough to feel held, but not so small that movement becomes difficult. Corners are familiar. Doorways are predictable. Nothing demands interpretation. This predictability is not dull. It is stabilizing. When the external world grows unreliable, internal consistency becomes valuable. Monuments, by contrast, are exhausting at night. They ask too much of the imagination. They carry memories that are too large to manage when tired. They remind the city of promises made in louder centuries. Homes do not do this. They ask only that you occupy them and then stop moving. There is also a difference in how time behaves within these spaces. Monuments stretch time. They invite comparison between past and present. They provoke questions. Homes compress time. They make tonight feel similar to last night and likely to tomorrow. This compression reduces anxiety. A city that feels temporally manageable sleeps more easily. Within a home, objects are not curated. They accumulate. Each one has proven its usefulness simply by remaining. A bench worn smooth by decades of sitting. A table that has survived countless meals without ceremony. These objects do not commemorate events. They support repetition. Their value lies in familiarity, not distinction. This familiarity extends to movement. People navigate their homes with minimal light because their bodies remember distances better than their eyes. Hands find walls automatically. Feet adjust to uneven floors without conscious thought. This bodily knowledge replaces the need for visual confirmation. The home becomes readable, even in darkness. There is a quiet redistribution of importance here. What once mattered because it was visible now matters because it is reliable. The city does not lose culture by this shift. It preserves it in smaller units. Customs survive in kitchens. Social order survives in sleeping arrangements. Care survives in routines too minor to record. Homes also alter social dynamics at night. Interaction becomes limited to those already inside. There are no audiences, no public roles to maintain. People relate to each other as necessary rather than as expected. This reduces friction. Fewer performances mean fewer mistakes. The city benefits from this narrowing of social obligation. Outside monuments remain exposed. They endure wind and darkness without complaint, but they do not participate in survival the way homes do. They do not adapt to temperature. They do not respond to sound. They do not adjust to the number of people using them. They simply exist. At night, existence alone is not enough. Homes, on the other hand, are constantly adjusting. A door closed because the air cools. A cloth added because the stone holds less warmth than expected. A body shifting because sleep demands a new position. These small adjustments are not recorded, but they accumulate into resilience. There is also an economy of care within homes that monuments cannot replicate. Resources are allocated carefully, light is shared, heat is conserved, space is negotiated, nothing is wasted because nothing can be replaced easily. This economy is not moral, it is practical. Waste creates work, and work is expensive at night. Rome's monumental past does not disappear because of this shift. It simply stops being useful after sunset. The city learns to compartmentalize its identity. By day, it remembers what it once was. By night, it focuses on what still works. This division allows both versions to coexist without conflict. The psychological effect of this transition is subtle but significant. When survival is located in homes rather than monuments, individuals feel less responsible for carrying the weight of the city. The burden of history lifts slightly. People are allowed to be small without feeling insignificant. This permission improves rest. There is even a mild, unspoken humor in how this plays out. Rome, once defined by its ability to impress, now relies on rooms that no visitor would ever seek out. The city endures because of places that would never appear on a map. This irony is not acknowledged, but it is effective. Homes also change how risk is perceived. Danger feels less abstract when confined to a small space. You know where you are vulnerable. You know what you can control. This clarity reduces panic. When risk is scaled down, it becomes manageable. As the night deepens, the city becomes a collection of lit and unlit rooms rather than a unified entity. Each home carries a small portion of continuity. No single space holds the whole city together. The city survives through distribution rather than concentration. This distributed survival is difficult to dramatize, which is why it is often overlooked. There are no focal points, no decisive locations, just countless ordinary interiors doing their quiet work. Rome remains because too many small spaces succeed simultaneously for collapse to arrive all at once. When dawn eventually approaches, monuments will regain their relevance. They will frame movement. They will organize memory. They will remind the city of its scale. But they will do so because homes kept the population intact through the night. In 410, Rome does not survive because its monuments are strong. It survives because its homes are sufficient. They replace grandeur with habit. They replace spectacle with shelter. They carry the city through the night without asking to be noticed. This is not decline. It is redistribution. Importance moves where it is needed most. And at night, that place is not where the city is remembered, but where it is lived. Silence in Rome is no longer an absence of activity. It is a practiced behavior, refined over time, adjusted nightly, and maintained with more care than any law still written down. By the year 410, silence has stopped being accidental. Earlier Romes were noisy by design. Sound once signaled order, presence, and authority. Noise meant life, meant control, meant that something was being managed. But as the city learned that constant management exhausted both systems and people, it also learned something more difficult. Silence, when done well, is not weakness. It is a skill. At night, this skill becomes visible precisely because it is not announced. Doors close without slamming. Footsteps soften automatically. Conversations taper rather than end. The city does not fall quiet all at once. It lowers its volume in stages like a body settling into sleep. Each reduction is intentional, though rarely conscious. Silence in this Rome is not imposed. No one enforces it street by street. That would require energy the city no longer wants to spend. Instead, silence spreads through imitation. When one household grows quiet, the next follows. When a street empties, nearby streets do the same. Quiet becomes contagious because it is convenient. People have learned what silence accomplishes. It reduces the number of things that require response. A quiet city does not provoke curiosity, does not invite confrontation, does not demand interpretation. It allows uncertainty to pass without being examined. In a Rome that has learned the cost of examination, this is a considerable advantage. The architecture supports this training. Walls are thick. Openings are limited. Sound is absorbed, redirected, softened. Houses are not built to broadcast internal life outward. They are built to contain it. This containment teaches behavior. You lower your voice because raising it gains nothing. Even movement adapts. People learn to shift weight without scraping stone, to step where surfaces are known, to carry objects without letting them announce themselves. These habits are not taught formally. They are learned through correction, through shared irritation, through the simple desire not to be the reason someone else wakes. There is a mild irony here. Silence, once associated with danger or emptiness, now signals stability. A loud night suggests disorder. A quiet one suggests that systems are working without supervision. Rome begins to trust nights that say little. Silence also changes how the city experiences time. Loud environments stretch moments. Each sound demands attention, making time feel crowded. Quiet compresses time. Hours pass with fewer markers. This compression makes the night feel shorter, more manageable. When time feels manageable, anxiety loses much of its force. The city's remaining institutions adapt to this norm. Patrols are quieter. Signals are minimal. Authority does not announce itself unless necessary. When power speaks softly, it avoids provoking response. Rome learns that presence does not require volume. Inside homes, silence becomes collaborative. Sleep depends on it. Rest improves when sound is predictable or absent. Households negotiate noise informally. A shift of position is allowed. Repeated disturbances are not. This negotiation is subtle but effective. It relies on mutual tolerance rather than rules. Children learn this skill early. They are corrected not through instruction but through reaction. A noise that wakes someone produces discomfort. Silence produces none. The lesson is immediate and practical. Over time, the body learns restraint before the mind ever names it. Outside, the city's open spaces grow acoustically empty. Forums that once amplified voices now hold nothing but air. The absence of sound here is not mournful. It is functional. These spaces no longer need to carry meaning at night. They are allowed to rest from representation. There is also safety in this quiet. Sound travels unpredictably in dense environments. A loud action reveals location. Silence preserves ambiguity. In a city that has learned to value ambiguity after dark, quiet becomes protective without becoming paranoid. Rome does not romanticize this silence. It does not frame it as peace or harmony. It treats it as maintenance. Silence reduces friction. Less friction means fewer corrections. Fewer corrections means systems last longer. This logic is not philosophical. It is operational. Even animals respond. Dogs bark less when there is less to react to. Livestock settle earlier. The city's non-human inhabitants adjust alongside people, reinforcing the rhythm. Quiet becomes the default state rather than the exception. The humor, if there is any, lies in how much effort goes into making this effortlessness appear natural. Silence is learned, not given. It requires coordination without command. Rome succeeds at this not because it plans well, but because it has learned what no longer works. In earlier centuries, silence might have felt like absence of control. Now it feels like evidence of it. A city that can remain quiet without collapsing demonstrates a level of internal agreement that no decree could enforce. As the night deepens, the quiet becomes layered rather than absolute. There is never total silence. There is breathing, water, occasional movement, But these sounds do not interrupt. They blend. They confirm life without insisting on attention. This layered silence allows the mind to drift. Without constant input, thoughts slow. Concerns lose urgency. Sleep arrives more easily. The city benefits indirectly from this collective restfulness. Fewer exhausted people make fewer mistakes the next day. Silence also protects memory. Loud events are remembered. Quiet continuities are not. By remaining quiet, the night escapes historical attention. It passes without record. This invisibility is one of its strengths. What is not recorded is harder to distort. Rome's survival at night depends less on action than on omission. Not speaking when speech is unnecessary. Not moving when movement adds nothing. Not reacting when reaction would escalate. Silence becomes the space in which these omissions can exist, without being mistaken for failure. By morning, this silence will dissolve without ceremony. The city will resume its sounds, its negotiations, its visible life. No one will remark on how quiet the night was unless something went wrong. Success, in this case, is indistinguishable from absence. In 410, Rome remains intact through nights like this. Nights where silence is not feared, not enforced, but practiced. Where quiet is understood as a shared technique rather than a void. The city survives because it knows when to stop speaking. And that knowledge, once learned, proves far more durable than any shouted command. Repetition in Rome is no longer a failure to progress. It is a decision to remain intact, made quietly each night and confirmed again every morning without discussion. By 410, repetition has become one of the city's most reliable comforts, though no one would describe it that way aloud. The word itself carries little prestige. It suggests stagnation, habit, a lack of imagination. Yet at night, repetition proves to be exactly what allows the city to rest. When tomorrow looks enough like yesterday, the mind does not need to stay alert, searching for surprises. In the darkened houses of Rome, routines return with a steadiness that feels almost deliberate. Lamps are placed where they were placed before. Doors are closed in the same order. Sleeping spaces are arranged according to patterns that have been tested repeatedly and found adequate. Nothing new is introduced because nothing new is required. The absence of innovation is not laziness. It is trust, earned through survival. Repetition removes choice, and this turns out to be a relief. When actions are known in advance, they no longer compete for attention. The body performs them without consultation. The hands move before thought intervenes. This automatic quality allows mental energy to withdraw from planning and settle into rest. Rome sleeps better when it does not have to invent the night again. The city itself participates in this pattern. Nights resemble one another closely. Darkness arrives. Activity contracts. Sound lowers. Systems continue quietly. Dawn follows without surprise. This predictability softens anxiety. A city that knows what night will look like does not fear it as much. There is also comfort in knowing that others are repeating the same motions. Somewhere nearby, another household is trimming a wick, arranging bedding, listening to water move through familiar channels. This shared repetition creates an unspoken coordination. No signal is exchanged. No agreement is made, but the city settles together through parallel action. Repetition also reduces the emotional weight of uncertainty. When conditions are difficult, novelty becomes exhausting. Each change demands adjustment. Each new situation requires interpretation. Repetition eliminates this demand. It allows people to move through the night without asking what it means. Meaning is postponed until daylight, where it belongs. In earlier centuries, Rome celebrated variety. Public life thrived on change, spectacle, and constant reinforcement of identity. By 410, that appetite has diminished. At night especially, variety feels risky. Repetition feels safe. A repeated action has already proven it does not cause harm. The architecture supports this preference. Spaces are used in the same way each night. Furniture is rarely moved. Routes through the house are consistent. Even darkness becomes familiar. Shadows fall in expected places. The body learns where it can move without thinking. This familiarity reduces fear more effectively than reassurance ever could. Repetition also allows mistakes to shrink. When routines are stable, errors are easier to detect and correct. A missing sound, a lamp that behaves differently, water that does not arrive as expected. These deviations stand out precisely because everything else remains the same. Repetition sharpens attention without increasing tension. There is a quiet irony in how much flexibility repetition creates. By fixing most actions, it frees the mind to adapt when something actually changes. Rome does not waste energy responding to imagined threats, because routine absorbs the night. When a real problem appears, it is noticed clearly against a background of sameness. The city's social life also benefits from this rhythm. Expectations narrow. People do not demand novelty from one another at night. Conversation repeats familiar themes or disappears entirely. This reduces social strain. When nothing new is required, presence alone becomes sufficient. Repetition also equalizes experience. When routines are shared, differences in status matter less after dark. Everyone closes doors, everyone lowers lights, everyone sleeps according to the same biological limits, night levels distinctions that daylight insists on maintaining. This leveling is not ideological, it is practical. Repetition spreads behaviors efficiently. When everyone does roughly the same thing, coordination happens without effort. The city moves as a collection of similar rhythms rather than a hierarchy of commands. Even time itself begins to feel repetitive. Hours lose their individual character. The night becomes a single extended interval rather than a sequence of moments. This temporal smoothing makes endurance easier. A long stretch without distinct events feels shorter than a series of interruptions. Rome learns to rely on this effect. Nights are allowed to blur, nothing important is scheduled to interrupt them, urgency is postponed. The city protects the night from novelty, the way it once protected daylight from chaos. There is also a subtle psychological safety in repetition. When actions repeat, they signal that yesterday did not end in disaster. Each repeated night confirms survival. This confirmation accumulates, confidence grows, not from achievement, but from continuity. The humor, if one looks for it, lies in how unimpressive this strategy appears. Rome survives not through innovation or brilliance, but through doing the same modest things again and again. There is nothing inspiring about this, and that may be why it works so well. Repetition also resists interpretation. Historians look for change, for rupture, for moments that can be named. Repetition produces none of these. It leaves little record. Nights blur together without distinguishing marks. The city continues beneath the threshold of documentation. For those living it, this invisibility is not a loss. It is protection. What is not noticed is less likely to be disturbed. Rome's nightly repetition shields it from the pressure to explain itself. As the night deepens, routines complete themselves. Lamps dim, bodies settle, sounds reduce to familiar background. The city reaches the most repetitive point of the night, where almost nothing changes from one moment to the next. This stillness is not emptiness. It is stability, made quiet. When dawn eventually approaches, repetition loosens its grip. Variations return, choices expand. The city stretches outward again. But the night leaves behind the memory of sameness, and that memory makes change easier to face. In 410, Rome survives, not because it reinvents itself each night, but because it refuses to. It repeats what works. It abandons what does not. It allows routine to carry it through hours when imagination would only cause trouble. Repetition becomes a form of care. Not exciting, not visible, but persistent. It holds the city together by refusing to demand more than people can give. The comfort of repetition lies in its refusal to ask questions. It does not wonder what comes next. It assumes that what came before is sufficient. And night after night, this assumption proves correct enough to keep Rome alive. On, speed, or witnesses. Night work is not ambitious. It is maintenance disguised as routine. Inside houses and courtyards, small tasks persist without ceremony. Tools are set down carefully rather than stored elaborately. Materials wait where they were last used. Nothing is prepared for display. The work that survives the night is work that can tolerate interruption and darkness. Sorting, repairing, measuring, waiting. These activities do not argue with the hour. They fit into it. Light shapes what can be done. Lamps kept low restrict movement to small areas, which conveniently restricts the scale of labor as well. You cannot build grand structures by oil light. You can mend what already exists. The city, perhaps unintentionally, aligns its expectations with its illumination. When light is modest, ambition follows. This alignment produces efficiency. Tasks chosen for the night are those that benefit from calm rather than speed. Counting, planning, rechecking. The night does not reward haste, it rewards patience. Rome adjusts accordingly, selecting work that gains accuracy from silence. Sound matters here. Night work is quiet not out of politeness, but because loud labor multiplies consequences. A dropped tool announces location. A raised voice invites response. Quiet work reduces interaction. It allows effort to remain private. In a city that has learned the cost of visibility, privacy is a form of protection. There is also a change in how time is measured. Daytime labor is divided by hours, appointments, and oversight. Night labor follows endurance. You work until the body signals completion. There are no clocks demanding output. This elasticity reduces strain. People stop before exhaustion becomes error. Night as a working environment favors familiarity. You work best on tasks you have performed many times. Novelty introduces risk. Risk introduces noise. Rome avoids this chain by assigning the night to repetition rather than invention. The result is not progress, but continuity, which is precisely the goal. Outside homes, some forms of labor persist cautiously. Bakers begin their preparations long before dawn. Water carriers check supplies. Watchful tasks continue in muted form. These roles do not seek recognition. They exist because morning depends on them. Their success is measured by absence of disruption. The city's layout supports this nocturnal productivity. Narrow streets discourage transport of heavy materials. Curved routes slow movement. These constraints filter out unsuitable work automatically. Only labor compatible with the environment remains. The rest waits. There is a mild irony in how productive this becomes. By lowering expectations, Rome preserves output. Night labor does not attempt to match daytime volume. It maintains foundations so that daytime activity does not collapse under its own weight. Maintenance proves more valuable than expansion. Authority adapts to this rhythm. Oversight loosens, rules simplify. There is little appetite for enforcement that would require constant presence. Instead, expectations are internalized. People know what can be done quietly and what cannot. The boundary is learned through consequence rather than decree. This internalization creates trust without optimism. Night workers do not assume safety. They assume limits. They plan around them. This realism prevents disappointment. When something cannot be finished, it is postponed without drama. The night is not blamed for refusing what it never promised. Tools behave differently at night. They are handled with care, not reverence, but respect, born of necessity. A broken tool cannot be replaced easily after dark. This awareness sharpens attention. Work slows, but errors decrease. Precision replaces momentum. The social dimension of night work is restrained. Cooperation happens in pairs or alone. Large groups generate complexity. Complexity generates sound. Rome chooses simplicity. Tasks are distributed rather than centralized. This decentralization reduces dependence on any single point of failure. There is also a psychological benefit to working at night without audience. Effort feels lighter when it is not evaluated. Without supervision, people work to completion rather than appearance. The absence of scrutiny allows honesty about capacity. You stop when tired. You resume when able. The city benefits from this candor. Night labor reshapes identity subtly. Workers are no longer defined solely by output. They are defined by reliability, showing up quietly, finishing modest tasks, leaving no trace. These traits become valuable in a city that survives by not attracting attention. The night itself reinforces this ethic. Darkness erases excess. It hides mistakes that would otherwise demand correction. It softens imperfections. Rome learns to accept work that is sufficient rather than ideal. This acceptance prevents paralysis. Economic exchange also adapts. Transactions at night are fewer and simpler. Trust replaces verification. Agreements are minimal. The risk of complication outweighs the benefit of precision. Daylight will bring opportunities for clarification. Night preserves relationships by postponing demands. There is a quiet discipline in knowing what not to attempt. Grand plans wait, disputes pause. Night labor focuses on what can be finished without escalation. This discipline reduces conflict. It keeps energy available for moments when it will be unavoidable. The city's infrastructure reflects this philosophy. Systems are designed to run unattended. Water flows, storage holds, paths remain passable without repair crews rushing in. When intervention is necessary, it is small and targeted. Large interventions wait for light. Rome discovers that treating night as a working environment does not diminish rest. It improves it. Work done quietly reduces anxiety. Problems addressed before sleep are less likely to intrude into it. The boundary between labor and rest becomes porous in a healthy way. There is humor in how unimpressed the night is by effort. No matter how diligently someone works, darkness does not applaud. This indifference removes the temptation to perform. Work becomes honest because there is no reward for spectacle. As hours pass, night labor tapers naturally. Bodies signal limits. Lamps dim. Tasks conclude. Nothing forces continuation. The city respects this threshold because ignoring it would cost more than stopping. Rome has learned to listen to fatigue as a guide rather than an obstacle. When dawn approaches, the work of the night reveals itself indirectly. Bread appears on time. Water is available. Doors open without repair. The city functions because someone worked without needing to be seen. Night labor leaves no monuments, only readiness. In 410, Rome does not treat night as wasted time. It treats it as a different workspace with different rules. These rules prioritize quiet, familiarity, and restraint. They reward care over speed. They protect the city from its own expectations. Night as a working environment does not promise improvement. It promises continuity. It ensures that what already exists remains usable. This promise, repeated nightly, becomes one of the city's most reliable assets. By accepting the limits of darkness, Rome expands its endurance. It survives not by conquering the night, but by employing it carefully. And when the city wakes, it does so without needing to explain how much work was done while no one was watching. Dawn without applause. Dawn in Rome does not arrive to announce survival. It arrives because arrival is simply what mornings do, regardless of whether anyone feels victorious enough to notice. By the year 410, the city has lost any interest in greeting the morning with ceremony. There are no trumpets of relief, no collective exhale, no sense that something has been narrowly escaped. Dawn comes quietly, almost apologetically, as if aware that the night has already done most of the important work and does not need to be interrupted too loudly. Light enters the city the same way it enters a courtyard, slowly, indirectly, touching surfaces before it touches intentions. Stone that held warmth through the night releases it without complaint. Walls that listened now return to being walls. Lamps that burned carefully are extinguished or ignored. No transition is marked. The city does not switch modes. It simply continues. People wake without urgency, not all at once, not in agreement. Sleep loosens its hold gradually, releasing bodies back into routine rather than into revelation. There is no sense that dawn brings answers. It brings tasks. This distinction matters. Answers demand interpretation. Tasks demand presence. Rome prefers the latter. Doors open because they always do. Not to make a statement, not to reassert order, but because staying closed would eventually become inconvenient. The city resumes movement without claiming momentum. Feet find streets that had forgotten their lines during the night and now remember them just enough to function. The remarkable thing about this morning is how little it needs to prove. There are no inspections to pass, no declarations to issue, no collective reassurance required. Survival does not ask for confirmation. It reveals itself through continuity. The fact that people wake at all is sufficient evidence. Sounds return cautiously, not as an eruption, but as accumulation. A voice here, a tool there, a cart beginning its slow argument with stone. Each sound joins the city without displacing the quiet that came before it. The night does not end abruptly. It thins. This thinning is important. A city that snaps from silence to noise experiences stress. Rome avoids this by allowing overlap. The night hands itself over gradually, ensuring that systems do not experience shock. Continuity is protected even in transition. There is no narrative arc to this dawn. Nothing is resolved, nothing is celebrated. The city does not congratulate itself for enduring another night. That would suggest the night was an enemy. Instead, dawn treats the night as a collaborator that has completed its shift. People do not speak of the night unless something failed. The absence of comment is the measure of success. When no one mentions the darkness, it means it behaved as expected. Rome values this predictability more than any dramatic reassurance. Work resumes not because hope returns, but because repetition does. The same tasks, the same routes, the same small negotiations reappear. Morning does not promise improvement. It promises familiarity. In a city that has learned to survive by lowering expectations, this promise is generous enough. The light of dawn does not expose secrets. It does not reveal hidden disasters or miraculous recoveries. It simply restores visibility to what already existed. The city looks the same because it has remained the same. Change, if it comes, will do so slowly, without permission from the sun. Authority also wakes without performance. Orders are not revised. Systems are not reset. What functioned during the night continues into the day with minimal adjustment. Rome's resilience lies in this refusal to dramatize transition. There is a quiet irony in how anticlimactic this is. Histories are written as if survival must feel like triumph, but here survival feels like inertia that has learned good habits. The city endures not because it overcomes the night, but because it does not antagonize it. Morning light moves across surfaces that have been worn smooth by centuries of use. These surfaces do not shine, they absorb. They carry forward the evidence of countless ordinary days that followed ordinary nights. Dawn does not renew them. It finds them ready. People step into the streets with no particular emotion attached to the fact that they are still there. Relief would imply danger. Gratitude would imply deliverance. Rome claims neither. Existence does not require commentary. This lack of applause is not bleak. It is efficient. Energy is conserved by not celebrating outcomes that were never in doubt. The city invests its limited resources in continuation rather than reflection. Reflection can wait, it always can. Even memory behaves differently at dawn. The night leaves few traces. No markers, no stories, no notable events. The city moves forward without dragging the night behind it. This forgetting is not neglect. It is hygiene. Carrying every night forward would eventually become unbearable. Rome's morning proves that survival does not need witnesses. It needs conditions stable enough that waking feels unremarkable. When getting out of bed is ordinary, the city has succeeded. The sun rises higher, shadows shorten, the city grows legible again, distances expand, plans reassert themselves, but none of this erases what the night accomplished. It only builds on it. In 410, Rome continues, not because dawn brings hope, but because night has already delivered stability. The city does not cheer the sun, it uses it. There is dignity in this restraint. A city that does not require applause to survive has learned something rare. It has learned to trust its own habits more than its myths. Dawn passes without ceremony, without witnesses, without a record. And that is precisely why it works.